If you've ever wondered, does conversion content actually work and will it apply to my business? Then tune in today's episode. Then tune into today's episode with Coach Shonda, where we are discussing the importance of conversion content and how it took her business from struggling to generating over 6 million people in views and generating consistent revenue. Are you ready? Let's get started. What's up, Coach? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the PT Profit Podcast. You're listening to episode 427, and it is my pleasure and my privilege to introduce to you one of my clients, Shonda. She is a relationship coach and the owner of Find the One and helps women find their perfect match after 30. In this episode, she's going to share with you her powerful story of how she came to become a coach, how she found the one, and her methodology in helping women actually find their perfect partner. So if you're curious about whether or not this process could work for you, then this episode is definitely for you. So without further ado, let's go ahead and roll that interview. What's up, Shonda? Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing so good. I'm really excited to dive in. So for those of you who are tuning in and have not had the pleasure of hearing your work, would you mind sharing a little bit about who you are, who you serve, and how you got there?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Shonda Howard, and I serve women who are over the age of 30 who are done dating toxic men, men that ghost them, men that breadcrumb them, men that are afraid of commitment, and really want to find a really good guy. And so I help them do that. I help them end those toxic dating patterns and meet the love of their life, somebody who's ready to build a life with them. And I came to this work through my own journey. So I always tell people I was the kind of quintessential Carrie Bradshaw. I had been living in New York City for 15 years. And I found myself in my late 30s while all of my friends were getting married and starting families and moving to Connecticut. I was living in the same studio apartment in Chelsea that I had been in for 15 years. And I was thinking to myself, I am going to die alone with 10 cats here if I don't figure this out, because I just couldn't get into a healthy relationship no matter what I tried.
Okay.
No, I'm in Chicago now. We relocated for my husband's job.
Okay, because I'm in New York. So I was like, wait, I could have sworn we would have talked about that. So I have so many places I want to go and so many different questions. What were some of the things that were coming up for you at the time of you realizing something had to change? Like, I'll share that, my friends who are dating now, some of them, a couple of them are post divorce. And so the things that are going through their mind are things like there are no good men left. I'm too late. I guess I just have to settle. If it would have worked, it would have worked by now. So I'm just curious, what are some of the things that you experienced and what were the steps that you took to move through that?
Yeah. So definitely a lot. I can relate a lot to what you're saying. It was a very special type of being tormented by your own brain, which is, I'm sure, what your friends are experiencing, right? Because I felt like I was constantly trying to take the action of lining up as many Tinder or Bumble dates as I could, and then coming up against, oh, I really like this guy. He's got a really good job in finance and he's really attractive, right? And he even goes to the Hamptons, and so I would get really excited, and then he would kind of like pull away, and I wouldn't know why. And this kept happening to me over and over again. And so when I really went all in on deciding that I had to figure this out and change it if I didn't want to end up as that crazy cat lady, like that cautionary tale. There was a woman that lived in my building in New York that was this cautionary tale. I really was tormented by these things because, again, I was watching my friends in New York City get married, and I will never forget, I was walking along the West Side Highway with one of them, and I was crying to her because of another failed situationship. And I said to her, I really think I just have to accept the fact that this isn't going to happen for me. Like maybe this doesn't just get to happen for everybody. And it's nice that it's happening for you and everyone else, but I need to actually just accept that so that I can like move on with my life, I think, because this is really causing me a lot of pain trying to make it happen. I definitely felt like I was too old. I felt like all the men in New York City where I lived were Peter Pans or finance D-bags, and that I thought I was gonna have to move, but then I was like, "Where am I gonna go? I'm from the Midwest. If I go to the Midwest, everyone's been married since they were 25, so that's not gonna work either." I just really felt backed into a corner. I felt like it just wasn't possible. I had missed the boat, and actually there were a lot of moments that I considered going back to like my toxic narcissistic ex because I was like, well, at least then I just won't be alone, even though I knew that that wasn't the answer and that wasn't the relationship that I wanted to be in.
How long were you in that relationship? Just out of nosiness.
Yeah, no, I was with this person for about 5 years, but it was very on off. And this was the relationship that all my friends hated this person. A lot of times we would get back together and I couldn't tell my family, I couldn't tell my friends. I finally walked away from that. And I did get the courage to walk away and I hired a therapist. That was the thing. I was like, you have to go to therapy. I don't know how we're going to do this. You have to go to therapy. I was in my mid 30s at the time. And I had just taken a trip to Paris with him, and none of my friends knew. I just went off the grid for like 4 days and thought that I was going to get back together with him. And then 2 weeks later, I saw on Instagram he had another relationship. So that was the catalyst for me to be like, you can't, we got to stop. I don't know what we're doing here. This is not working. Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. So now you are crying to your friend. You decide you're going to make a change and that you said, maybe this just isn't for me. So then what was the next step? What happened?
So this was coming off of the heels, by the way, of another relationship where I really thought we were headed in the right direction. I spent 3 months with this person. And just to give you a little bit of context and like a picture of what this looked like, the day that we ended things was a Friday. It was a classic summer Friday in New York City. He invited me to lunch. We spent all day together from 1 p.m. until 9 p.m., walking around the village, stopping for margaritas, holding hands. Went back to my apartment to pack an overnight bag to go back to his place. And it's in that moment at 9 p.m. that he turns to me and says, I don't think this is working. And I'm like, but I just spent all day with you. What do you mean this isn't working? I was so confused. Right. So I just like let him go. And so it was like, it was the aftermath of this situation because I was like, I'm just confounded. Like he took me to the Hamptons. He introduced me to his friends. Like, how is it possible that he didn't think it was working when I thought it was? And what I realized, right? So after I had that moment with my friend where I was like, this isn't going to happen. Like, it just always goes this way. I realized the next morning I woke up and I went, it just clicked in my brain. I went, he's emotionally unavailable. He's afraid of commitment. We started to get to the point where we were going to like integrate further and he freaked out and left. And then I started to do the math in my head and I went, oh, wait, they've all been afraid of commitment. They've all been emotionally unavailable. And I just had this aha moment where I was like, you know what? I was like, if I could figure this out, because this isn't just a them problem, this is a me problem. And if I can figure this out, I can change this. And I just really, I describe it to my clients as a decision. I made a decision that I was like, yes, that is my worst fear that it's not going to happen, but I'm deciding that I'm going to go all in on figuring this out. And that's what I did.
Okay, great. So carry me through the process. Now you are talking to the version of you, 5 years ago, where your client comes on board and says like, all right. What I'm also curious about as you begin to dive into your process, I'm curious about like, does this process work for people who potentially have never been able to find a partner, or they already think that they're struggled, or is it, for people who feel like they maybe they're a widow and they had a partner and they don't feel like they deserve another partner? Walk me through this.
Yeah. So to answer your question, yes, it's for everyone and anyone. And so what I always say, because I do have a lot of clients that come to me and they say, but I'm in my 50s and I've never been in a relationship, or I'm divorced, or I'm not attracting anybody. And what I always point them towards is that whatever the pattern is that we're identifying here, that's the first clue as to what's going on inside of your subconscious mind. Because we want to look at everything through the lens of these relationships or lack thereof, whatever we're experiencing, it's a mirror for what's going on inside of our nervous system and our subconscious. And that's the unlock to start to understand and go a little bit deeper. So for me, I really had to look at why does it feel good to my nervous system or familiar or predictable to constantly attract men who are avoidant. And what I saw when I looked at that was, oh, I have an anxious avoidant attachment style. And that is a direct mirror, right? That's a magnet for men who are avoidant. Like that's just what it is, right? So I had to go in and do the work within my subconscious, within my nervous system to actually become securely attached. And so that work and that attachment work applies to everybody because we all are humans and we all have human parents that raised us.
Yeah. Okay. So what does that look like how do you know when you're securely attached?
Attached, how I describe it is, especially in dating, we're showing up to the process of finding love because we really want love, not because we need it. So we don't need it to feel validated. We don't need it to feel worthy, whole, complete. Right. And so then we can go into dating from a really grounded place with this regulated nervous system where we're like, great, I'm just here to get to know you, to gather some information, but I'm not attaching to an outcome with you. I'm not attaching to you too soon. So after one date or even 0 dates, and we've just been chatting, I'm not attaching to the idea of you. I'm just completely grounded in myself because I know that my life is really freaking good and I'm amazing. And so I'm willing to wait for the right person and know and trust that it's going to happen because I'm going to keep showing up, right? I'm going to keep doing the tangible, but I'm not going to try to force a square into a circle anymore just because I'm afraid to be alone.
So it was almost this sense of once you became okay with the fact that if I end up alone, I'll be okay. That was what made you more available to attract the right person. Right.
Yeah, but no, totally. But it wasn't, I want to caveat that because it's very true. And that can be a very hard thing for people to hear because then their brain is like, well, if you're telling me that you're just going to make me happy being single, then I'm never going to get what I want. And there's a distinction between doing it as a means to an end because I'm trying to get the result. And there's also a distinction between saying, well, I'm okay being single because that's all that I'm ever going to have. Right. So those are two different scenarios. And that's not what we're saying. We're saying it is, kind of like you talk about in your work, which I love when you say you have to live on the razor's edge where you care about everything and nothing at the same time. It's a little bit of that. I deeply desire this thing, but I'm not feeling the lack of it every day. Right. And so I am okay being by myself in that sense, but I can still want it, but I'm still okay. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to regulate if any of those thoughts and those emotions start to come up of I'm never going to be with anybody and I'm going to be all alone. Right. We're going to process and then we're going to regulate and come back to I do want it, but I'm okay right now.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. It kind of reminds me of this saying that I started to live by and started to teach my children, which is, we all hear treat others the way you want to be treated. But it really comes down to treat yourself the way you want others to treat you. So if you're wanting to bring and call in that type of love that is unconditional and everlasting, can you provide that same unconditional and everlasting love to yourself first?
Yeah.
It's one of those things that we all double tap on Instagram, like, oh yeah, I love yourself. But then in practice can feel impossible, especially when you're up against rejection all the time.
Yeah. Rejection and a timeline, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that fear that I am running out of time because I do work with a lot of women who are in their mid to late 30s, some even in their 40s, and they want kids too. So that comes into play.
So how do you help people navigate the time component? How much time does it actually?
From the moment that I told you about where I had my come to Jesus and I was like, we're not going to stand for this. Like, this is a pattern and we just have to figure it out. From that moment until I met my husband was 5 months.
Mhm.
So I always tell people we can do it in 6 months, right? But sometimes, like I have clients who it's taken them 7 or 8, right? So that is a really tricky piece because our brain wants it's going to happen in this many days. And we do have to let go a little bit of that timeline because that's part of being secure within yourself. Again, is not being so attached to a timeline that you're letting it trip you up and create a lot of urgency. Because when we go out to date, we want to be assessing for red flags. We want to be assessing for what is happening in our nervous system with this other person. And we also want to be living in a really hyper present state because that actually makes you super magnetic to other people. That's like a life hack, right? Like I know you have a background in theater, I do too. And there's a reason why people will say don't ever act with a dog or a baby. Well, it's because a dog or a baby pulls focus because they're so hyper present. And so that's sort of a hack for dating and for life is like if you want to be super magnetic to anybody, you just show up and you're super present where you're just engaging with what's right in front of you versus being tripped up in your head of like, I don't know, I don't like the way that he did that, or I don't like, oh gosh, does he like me? I don't know, right? And so instead of being in your head, we want you to be present.
What are some of your favorite tools to help people get present?
So I teach a lot of grounding, and this really comes back to kind of the point that you were making earlier about it is really hard to continue to hold that razor's edge of like, I want love, but I don't need it, especially when you're doing the tangible steps of dating, of actually dating and feeling rejected, right? And so I teach a lot of self-soothing. I teach a lot of grounding techniques. I teach my clients, we use hypnotherapy meditations to kind of do the rewiring. That's what they do with me. But then I'm teaching them a bunch of skills too that they're practicing in their daily life, 5 senses walks, 5 senses meditations, 5 4 3 2 1 grounding techniques, stuff that's very therapeutic in a sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm also curious, have something I notice a lot of my friends or some of my friends who stay in horrible marriages or horrible relationships because of some of the things that you're talking about. It's almost as if like, hey, if you did this work, even if you weren't looking for the one, it would still help you, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I always tell people, like, once they come into my program, I'm like, okay, great. Now that you're here, that was a little bit of a Trojan horse in the sense of we're going to get you to the relationship you want, but that's just going to be the bonus. That's going to be like the cherry on top because the work that we're going to do in pursuit of it, you're going to feel so different and you're going to love your freaking life so much more that you're literally not even going to need it anymore. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that is the catch 22 because that's the kind of click that allows us to magnetize the person really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But all of that to say, yeah, I mean, I think that there's so much value in doing this work, regardless of if you're in a relationship or not.
I'm also curious, like, did they have any ripple effects, like people who've like worked with you and done some of this work and you as well? Like, did you notice other ripple effects that happened in your other relationships, like your relationships with your friends, with your family? Like, did you notice like how has that translated in your other relationships in life?
Yeah, so it is kind of crazy to look back on. So I'll start with myself and then I'll speak to my clients a little bit too, because the answer is yes, that's the short answer. I try to explain this to people, but again, this is like the Trojan horse of it all. When the ripple effects of doing that work for me, and this all happened before I met Brian, my husband, by the way, were that I basically did like a full life audit. Like my entire life changed. Like I went after a promotion at work. I started doing a completely different role. I got a raise. I started paying down my debt. I lost 20 pounds. And I want to be clear, it wasn't because I was like, I need to lose weight to meet a man. It was just because I started taking care of myself, because I started to do it from a place of I actually value myself and I love myself and I want to feel good. Right. So I lost 20 pounds. I started taking all of these dream vacations by myself. So I went to Paris and London and Nicaragua. I was a different person, and it changed the types of friends that I was spending time with. So I was no longer staying out until 3 o'clock in the morning on Saturday drinking. I was spending time with friends who we would do like really fun activities during the daytime, and we would go to yoga and soul cycle and do things that like were very uplifting, if that makes sense. So it changed everything in my life. And through that process, I became a different person. I became a person that then when I was sitting across from my husband, he was sitting with a different version of me and we both agreed, we said this on both of our sides, that if we had met 6 months earlier, we probably wouldn't have been a match because he was doing a lot of deep work on himself. I was doing a lot of deep work on myself. And I'll never forget, I'll just tell this story really quickly. When we met, it was early 2017. I was in New York City. This was right after the Women's March, after, Trump got elected. They did the famous Women's March. And so we were sitting at lunch and he asked me this question. He was like, "Did you go to the Women's March?" And I was like, "Yeah, I did. I went with my friends." And he paused and he says, "That's interesting." He's like, "I'm just taking that in because you don't seem like a real like activist energy. You seem like a very sweet, like soft woman." And I had to really take that in for a moment because I can have a very big personality, and part of the way that I really protected myself for decades was that I would come off as very harsh and abrasive, to the point where like my friends, if we would be out in a bar or something and a guy would come up to me, I would like make fun of him and people would be like, "You're being so mean," and I'd be like, that's just kind of who I was. But that was my armor, right? And so as I became a different person, I was able to like just let a different part of me out that was more vulnerable and more feminine, truly.
Mm.
So that's kind of my story. And then yeah, same with my clients. Like I have a client that just relocated. She's taking a sabbatical from her job right now. She works in consulting and she's like doing yoga teacher training, and she's doing all of these other things now that are just enhancing her life in so many ways. I have another client that just relocated to another country, and so it's different for everybody because it really depends on what is it that's unique and authentic to you that you really want, that's going to like enhance who you are and help you step into the greatest version of yourself, essentially.
So when he said that to you, right?
Yeah.
What did you like? Did you have an initial reaction of like WTF? Like, did that neural pathway activate? Did you have to actually be like, no, I'm gonna turn left instead of turn right?
No, I took it in because I saw it very clearly as, wow, like like everything that I've done has worked and it's
Mm-hmm.
incredible. And I'm seeing the evidence of it, that I'm able
Mm-hmm.
to like show up as this version of myself and it's being received by
That's so
someone
cool.
else
That's
and
cool.
reflected back to me.
So I'm also curious, in terms of as you're going through this process and now you have to go back into the game, right? It kind of reminds me, I deal a lot with this with my clients in terms of, I've had experiences like this before. What can feel familiar can sometimes be scary, even though you knew you still wanted this. And now you have to kind of like go back into the kitchen after you got burned. So what are some of the things that you do to help navigate the fact that, and for your clients as well, navigate the fact that like, hey, I have to date. And my previous experience has suggested that dating sucks. How do you go back into the fight?
Think you have to make a commitment. I tell everybody the discomfort of dating, because it is going to be uncomfortable. You are going to experience rejection. At the end of the day, I kept reminding myself, first of all it takes is one. Second of all, everyone is not for you, and therefore you are not for everybody. So you cannot have the expectation that you are going to be for everybody, because we are not looking for anyone. If I wanted to meet anybody, I could find anybody to be with. I'm looking for the person who I am meant to be with. Okay. I had to keep reminding myself that throughout the process. And I had to make a decision that I was willing to get really freaking uncomfortable, and that I was willing to feel that. And that if that was truly going to be the currency on the way to where I was going, and I was willing to pay it. Right. And then it's also the like, you're going to put yourself out there, right? So I was trying to go all in. I decided it was an experiment. I was like, I'm going to go all in a completely different way. And part of that in my journey was learning how to be more vulnerable each time. So I'd put myself out there. It would end in rejection. And then I would come back home for a cuddle. That's what I tell my clients. We're going to come back home for a cuddle. We're going to self-soothe. We're going to process our emotions. We're going to throw ourselves on the bed. We're going to cry about it. We're going to get out all of the fears, right? This isn't working. I am getting too old. See, nobody wants me. Nobody's ever going to choose me. We're going to get clear on what those fears are, right? And then we're going to decide that that's not true. That's not where we're going. And then when we're in a regulated state, we're going to get clear on what we're choosing to believe. And then we're going to go again. And we're just going to keep going again. Right. The other thing I'll say that happens, this is something that I coined, which is called the ladder effect. What I started to notice was that as I was doing this work within my subconscious and my nervous system, every guy that I was dating started to be a little bit better than the last. And I was clocking it because I had done the exercise of, I'm going to get clear on what I want, like so clear at a list of like 100 things. Now I do that list in a very specific way where we're not just focusing on like your height and your eye color. We want to think about what is it that we really want at the core. So what do we want to feel? But I did that list in a very specific way. And I started to notice that every guy that I was dating had like more of those qualities, more availability, pursuing me more. And so maybe it was like, I started to date guys who were just like really looking for a relationship. And then I was like, I'm trying this for like 10 dates and I'm just not feeling it. So I'm going to be willing to walk away because I'm choosing to believe that I get to have exactly what I want. I'm not getting 90% of the way there. Right. And so, but it gave me so much hope. Like it kept me in the right mindset to see the evidence of, wow, like I'm really starting to attract guys who are just good guys at the core. And it's just not the right fit yet. Until I got to the top of the ladder and my husband was sitting across from me and I was like, oh damn, like this is it.
Yeah.
And I just knew, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that I was at like in a lot of ease about that at that point.
Yeah, so I'm also curious too, because now you are partnered, and we all know that nobody's perfect. No human's perfect, and no relationship is going to be perfect. And I don't think anyone necessarily expects that. However, I do think, and this is my opinion, so correct me if I'm wrong in this, but I do think that, there's scar tissue around anything that feels familiar. And so I'm curious, like, how do you navigate discomfort or trying to understand like, oh, this is something we disagree on, this is something that I can accept about him and move on, versus deciding like, actually this is something that's incongruent and I can't accept this. So how do you find those boundaries and lines for yourself and coach your clients to do the same?
Yeah. So what I'll say is that first, part of attracting the right partner is getting really clear on what your values and your worldview is, and making sure that you're attracting somebody who just aligns on those foundational pieces, right? So we have shared values, we have a shared worldview, we are both people that are going to keep improving ourselves no matter what. We're always doing personal development. We care about communication. We're both committed to our partnership. So that when that foundation is in place, that kind of does a lot of the work for you. Now, I'm not saying, by the way, that we don't have difficult times or difficult conversations, but I think that when you know that you have that foundation, that creates a level of safety for your nervous system. At least for me, that does. And what happens is then because I tell my clients too, I'm like, we don't just like, it's not like we flip a switch and we become securely attached and then it just is better. We're always going to be dealing with those insecure attachments that keep trying to like come up in different ways. It's like layers of the onion that we're peeling back. And so I have moments in my marriage where I still experience the insecurity coming up or the anxious attachment coming up. And I have, I've really developed some tools to get clear on like, oh, this is my stuff. It's actually not about you. But sometimes I'm not able to do that. I'm like out of my mind. And so I'm just bringing it to him to be like, I don't like the way you're doing this, or I don't like the way you're talking to me, or blah, 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 right? The caveat being that I've chosen a partner who can hold all of that for me. And I've known that since the beginning. And we can have communication and disagreement in a healthy way. We understand that disagreement rupture is a part of a healthy relationship. It's all about what goes into the repair, right? And so then we start to get really good at bringing those skills in. And throughout the work, right, I'm always tracking what's going on with my nervous system and my insecure attachment. And like sometimes I'm reacting from it, but I always have the awareness to process and then come back into the relationship or into the communication and say, hey, this is what was going on for me. I was feeling this way because of this. Here's something that I think I really need, right? And so we can have that open communication. But it starts with attracting the right partner, right? Because I've been in relationships that couldn't hold me in that. I've been in relationships where I was too much in the, I'm feeling really anxious and I don't know how to articulate that. And so I'm getting mad about this thing. And now you're leaving and you're not going to even engage in the conversation. Does that make sense?
It does. And now I'm curious, like, you have kids, right? Yeah, okay.
You
So
have two
now
kids.
now when you find the one and you have all these like big new experiences that come into the relationship and you have this foundation, have you noticed that, things change or at least like navigate the changes that happen? And I'll share why I'm asking.
Yeah. I mean, 1,000%, right? Like you have kids, you
Mhm.
know. I think that it can be really hard to conceptualize for anybody that hasn't had children yet, just how much that shifts and changes everything in your life, but definitely your relationship, especially when you're in like the early childhood years, especially as the mother. You're now responsible for co-regulating your children. So there's not a lot of space for like your romantic partner for a few years, And so Brian and I are still kind of coming out of that season, but we've been really mindful about, even though there are stretches where it feels like maybe we kind of disconnect a little bit because the chaos of life becomes so much and we become really good at our to-do lists, we are super mindful about like reconnecting in very specific ways and like making sure that we're making that a priority. But it's by design. I mean, part of it is just that, and again, I think this comes back to picking the right partner, because if you don't have the right partner, you're not going to probably weather that storm as well, if at all. And so again, we have that foundation of trust and knowing that we're committed to the relationship and knowing that we're best friends, because in the beginning of that relationship, you're in a phase of what's called limerence, which is where you're just like literally falling in love and it feels so good and you're addicted and you're obsessed and you're like, I can't get enough of this person. When limerence fades, if you're in the right relationship, you're going to create something that's much deeper, right?
Mm-hmm.
But not everybody does that because they don't understand that opportunity or how to do that, right? And they just tend to think, oh, well, like the sexy fun times are gone. I guess there's no spark left. That's not how we look at it.
And here's why I'm asking is because my husband and I, we've been together now for 18 years. But it feels like a long time. Like I feel like sometimes it's hard for me to remember when I wasn't with him. Like I've always
Yeah.
felt like we're together. But it's interesting because there are things that I have experienced with him that you could not have anticipated. Like, there's no way that we would have been able to have this conversation about how we're going to handle our 7-year-old's neurodivergence. Like, there's no way we would have been able to have that conversation before we got married. Right. And
Yeah.
so there are things that we have had to face that we, like, for the first time in our lives together in 20 years, have felt like we're not aligned in how we're going to do this. Right.
Mhm.
I'm surprised that this is not an easy piece of alignment. Like we definitely have it's not a point of contention. I don't share it to say like, oh, this is a point of contention and there's friction. There's no friction because of this foundation that we have
Yeah.
is surprising in terms of like, okay, well, we just have to accept that this is what it is right now. And we're just gonna have to navigate this. We
Yeah.
choose to do it together despite knowing that we have different opinions on how to handle it, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so it's interesting, right? It comes back to for me at least, I always think of it as like, hey, I love you all of you, all parts of you, just like I love all parts of my children, even things I disagree with. That is part of unconditional love that I give to you as well.
Yeah.
And I think that that can be really hard. It's hard for people, especially people who've been hurt before.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I met my husband older and we had children later. And to me, I'm like, this is the benefit of not marrying your high school sweetheart because when you're 18, you can't even, like,
No.
there's a benefit to waiting, in my opinion.
I mean, there's a lot of other benefits to waiting too. We're always like, oh, this is why you have kids later in life because you have, some money to pay for a 12-year-old to come over and sit with them on Saturday because they just need a break.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Sure, but like it's hard. This stuff is hard. Relationships can be challenging. They're so fulfilling, but their work, their choice.
they are. And I don't ever want anybody to take away that it's like, because I do think that single women, especially when they've been wanting this for a long time and they're like working really hard to create it, I think that there can be this sense of, if I could just have this, I don't care about anything else. Everything else will be fine. If I could just know that I have my person, I will be happy with whatever else life throws at me. And a lot of the work that I do actually before we find somebody's person is to say, okay, and this is part of how we stay regulated in dating. Let's take the focus off of finding him for a minute and let's connect back to, if I were already there, what's that version of me thinking about? What's she trying to create? Is she writing a book? Is she creating a new business? Is she running a marathon? Like, let's think about what she's thinking about because she's thinking about other things. Your life doesn't just get wrapped up with the bow and end when you meet your person,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That's just the beginning in a lot of
Yes.
ways.
Something too that you said that I want to touch on, which I think is really important, is that when you're navigating these kinds of things, you need support. Like a person needs support to help you identify blind spots and
Yeah.
remove roadblocks and hold space for you when you can't hold it for yourself. Like we're not meant
Oh,
to
yeah.
do this life by ourselves.
Oh, no. I mean, and I'm reminded of it every day now that we're in like the AI age,
Hmm.
like just how meaningful that connection is when we get it.
Hmm.
It's so important. It's everything.
It's everything.
Mhm.
I'm also curious, like, especially now as we're starting to move into the holiday season, I feel like sometimes the holiday season is a very challenging experience for people, like with family relationships. It kind of is this like end of this year season where people are kind of like another year gone in their life. So, I'm curious.
Oh, I mean, it's one of the most emotionally triggering and loaded seasons and times of year because as a single woman, you are surrounded by couples going to holiday parties. You're getting invited to holiday parties and you're showing up as the only single one there. You are going to family functions where you're sitting next to your Aunt Mildred or your Uncle Tom, who's like, so why are you still single? There must be something wrong with you. Gosh, I thought you'd be married by now. And it can be so challenging, right? And then your mom's looking at you going, have you tried the online dating? Like, I really think you should download Bumble again. And you're like, listen, people, you want to just like write it on your forehead. Like, I'm doing the work here. I want love. You think that I'm single because I'm choosing this life? That's not what's going on here. Right? It can be so triggering because it's constant. It's coming at you so constantly. And it really is. I usually teach a free masterclass around the holidays for that reason, because I'm like, we got to have some tools here. We got to have some boundaries. We got to understand we got to have a plan before we go into the holiday dinner and holiday parties. And I also think that I want people to know that it doesn't actually have to feel that way, because that is part of the work of becoming securely attached, is that it's like, oh, okay, you can have your opinion. Like, I don't really care. I'll share a really quick story about that. So when I was dating in New York City, this was my last single like holiday season, but I had already done all of that work. I was dating a guy who was a friend of a friend. I invited him my friends did this like famous holiday pub crawl every year. So we'd go to like the Ritz or like the St. Regis. We'd go to all of these fancy hotel lobbies and we called it Holidate. And I invited this guy who like knew my friends because that's how I met him. We had been dating. I invited him and he showed up to the St. Regis, walked in with another woman. He brought a date to the event that I invited him to as my date, right? So it was like
God.
totally hilarious. My friends have photos of me like in the corner dressed up as an elf, like hiding, and I was like, what is happening? I was so confused. But, I was a few drinks in, so I composed myself and I just went over and I said, so good to see you. Like, who's this? And I shook her hand. And then kind of went over to the bar with some friends and just like let it go. And they ended up leaving. They didn't stick around for a long time. I did have some feelings in that next day that I needed to process about it, but I didn't make it mean anything. I literally was just like, this doesn't mean anything about where I'm going. That's a him problem. He's
He
like
did he come
confused.
back?
Like,
Did he try and, like, go out with you again, or was that was his way of saying, "I'm done"?
no. Oh, I don't know if he was saying I'm done. I think we did end up having a final conversation that I initiated a few days later to just be like, hey, like, I just want to let you know that I was confused because I was under the impression that, you were coming as my date. And he was like, I'm so sorry. I didn't even, he's like, I understand how this has been all very confusing. And I don't remember really what he said. It was all very bizarre, but that was more from my point of view. I wasn't angry. I just wanted to like have that moment of closure and express that to him. I got really good at the end of doing all that work of being able to say from a very grounded place, not needing anything from you, being able to say, hey, like, this is what happened and this is what I feel about it and this is how I'm interpreting it, and then letting it go. And I tell that story because I met my husband 3 months later. You know what I mean? So I was just like, all right, we're going to go again. This doesn't mean anything. I was so untriggerable that holiday season because of the work that I did.
How'd you meet your husband?
So my husband was actually a setup. It was kind of like a secret setup. So we had two really good friends from LA that were in town for the weekend, and they invited us both to dinner without telling each other. And they were hoping that like sparks would fly. And there was just it was like no pressure. We were having a really good time. We were all chatting. I really didn't think anything of it. I thought we were just going to be friends. And he invited me for coffee as friends like a week later. And it was actually at that coffee date that turned into a lunch date that I was like, oh, this is my person. And I just was like, yeah, this is what it is. It's no big deal, right? And it just kind of it happened from there pretty quickly.
It's
We were
great.
engaged like 6 months later. And I'll share like, at the time I was 37. So I had gotten very clear on how I wanted this experience of finding my person to go and to feel for me every step of the way. That was in what I wrote down. Like that was in the neural pathway that I was creating. Like, I'm going to know very quickly. I'm going to feel so safe with this person. It's going to unfold very quickly. Like, we're not going to waste a lot of time. We're both going to want at least one kid. Like, all of these things. And there were some things that you just really can't explain in that too, right? Like, I was like, I want somebody who's like does a really big Christmas and is close with their family, right? And like that was something that I got. I want somebody who's creative but also has a stable job. My husband was doing stand-up comedy, but he also like worked in a bank, you know what I mean? So it was just all of these things that you can't really explain too, that like I really attribute to like I put that program in my subconscious. I became a match for it, and then he showed up.
So good. Okay, so I want to be mindful of your time, and so I will ask you, I'm curious, if you could, I know you're like me in the sense of like, it's not about a regret. It's not like, oh man, I wish I had done XYZ. But if you could talk to the version of yourself from, 10 years ago, what are some of the things
Yeah.
that you wish you knew back then that you know now? That is, so if someone is the version of you that you were at, like, what were some of the things that you would tell them to expedite some of your learnings?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that everyone is on their own timeline, right? And that you do really have control over this from the standpoint of you can control what's going on within your subconscious program. That's what you can control, right? And so you get to control that, but everyone's on their own timeline. So don't use other people's timelines against you. I know it's easy. I know that people are getting married and they're looking at you and they're telling you, like, maybe your expectations are too high. Maybe you should just settle. Maybe you should lower your standards, right? That's what women hear all the time. People would tell me that, and I would be dating somebody and he would be like really good on paper, but I just didn't feel an emotional connection. And they'd be like, maybe you're just not everyone's going to be as emotional as you. And I was like, well, F that, because I'm not settling for less than I want, right? So you're on your own timeline. You have to keep believing that it's possible for you. You have to see all of the things around you, all of the couples, all of the healthy relationships, all of your friends that are getting engaged and getting married as evidence of what's possible for you, because that's going to help build those neural pathways. And then the last thing that I would say is probably just don't like don't stay in something that you know you don't want because you're afraid to. The craziest thing is that I have a friend from New York City who's in town here in Chicago. We had dinner last night and we were having like the best time, just like laughing about when we were in our single 30s together. And there's a quote from The Office. I don't know if you watch The Office. I might be
Yes.
like way dating myself. There's a
No.
quote from The Office that we were talking about when Andy says, I wish someone had told me those were the good old days. Now, I don't say that because I'm saying that it doesn't get better. It does get better when you have your person, but there's this sense of feeling like, oh shit, like I kind of missed out on just how good that was because I was so worried that I was never going to meet anybody, if that makes sense.
Makes sense.
Like, if you know that you're going to meet your person in the next 6 to 12 months, and that's for sure happening, then what the heck are you going to go do right now? Because this is the single time. This is the adventure time. You get to you get to write this story however you want it.
I think
So go do that.
I think it circles back to what you said earlier about the importance of being present.
Mhm.
Because so much of us, we're always living either in the future of what's not here yet or in the past of what could happen again. And so few people are living in actual, like, now, today. That's it.
Yeah.
I think it's so
Yeah.
powerful. Okay. All right. So before I let you go, Shonda has been one of my accelerator clients, and it has been such a pleasure and a privilege to watch her like really just own her expertise and share it with the world. And I just cannot wait to see how her hockey stick of growth is just going to be exponentially like just through the roof, because what she does, which you have now heard, is just so powerful. So, Shonda, I'm curious from your perspective as a client, what are some of the things that you would say have been your favorite parts, things that you have learned, things that you were struggling with, and things that have helped you on your path to success?
Oh my gosh, so many. Let me also just caveat this by saying that um when I came into your program, I was so like anti-launch because I had done a launch and it almost killed me. Literally, it took me out. It took my nervous system out for like weeks that I couldn't even fathom planning another launch. So I was just trying to figure out what I was doing. I was trying a lot of weird evergreen strategies that just also weren't converting or working for me. And so since joining your program, I have over the last few months signed like the most amount of people, even beyond doing a launch, right? So that just tells me, first of all, that the strategies are working, like you know what the heck you're doing. I think one of the biggest ahas that I have is the process and the way that you've laid it out just works. When I follow the process and I do what you tell me to do, it works. And I'm a person who can get like shiny object syndrome, and I can get very easily be like, oh, I should try this content strategy or I should try this content strategy. And I was actually messaging with another accelerator today about this because we were talking about maybe doing some body doubling to do our conversion content together. And I was like, I don't know why I keep not wanting to do the conversion content, like thinking that something else is the answer because the conversion content has been what has worked. What am I doing? So I think the aha or the takeaway is just like, you just know what you're doing. And it's so simple. It's like just follow the process one step at a time. And then of course your support has been invaluable because I'm a person that I'm probably going to be a person that discovers she has ADHD in perimenopause. I haven't gotten there yet. I think that's coming. But I tend to get really overwhelmed by instructions these days. And so there have been many times that I've had to reach out to you and ask for you to just, what's the one step that I need to take right now? I need you to just put me on the path. And you do that for me so expertly. Like, no, just do this one thing. I'm like, okay, I can handle that. So, it's all of it, but it's been a really incredible program.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I also, it's interesting because I feel like we're so similar. Like even
Mm.
listening to you, I feel like the way that we think, because our processes are really similar. And so for me, I'm such a big picture thinker. Somebody comes to me and says like, "Hey, I've got this problem." I'm like, "Oh, I know exactly what this over here looks like, and I know what you're here. You just have to do all these steps, but you're going to get it." And sometimes I lay it out from top down, and then I realize,
Uh-huh.
"Okay, wait. Let's just do the next best thing."
Yeah. Totally, but that's why it's so great that we have access to you. I mean, that has just been unreal. And I think I don't know if I told you this, but when I signed up for the program, I had been on your email list for about 4 months. I had heard you on another podcast, and then I jumped onto your list. I think I bought one of your $9 programs, didn't do it, didn't implement because I was like, there's too many steps. I'm not going to be able to figure this out. And then I just got an email from you that was like, one day, like, hey, I know you're thinking about quitting. Let's
Yes.
talk about it, right? Blah, 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 blah. And then I was like, book a call. I was like, I'm just going to book this call, right?
Yes.
And I was thinking about that though in my quest to really recommit to the process and let it be simple, because my brain wants to overcomplicate things. Because I was like, the conversion content has worked for me. The conversion content is what got me in the room. The conversion content works. Like, we should have zero resistance to doing this.
Well,
We
our
just need to sit
brain,
down
you
and do
know,
it.
our brain is just so kooky, right? And what's interesting for anyone who's ever done any parts integration is that all parts of your brain, the resistance and the ones that want to make you move forward, are all designed to do the one thing: keep you safe and help you get to what it is that you want. They're just taking different paths.
Yeah.
So that's why any parts integration is so important. Anyway, Shonda, you are so amazing. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared. For those of you who want to connect with you and potentially work with you, learn more about what you do, what are some of the best places to send them?
Yeah, so you could definitely head to my Instagram. It's Shonda Howard Love is the handle. And I have a ton of free content there. I have a podcast called Finding Love After 30. The link is on my Instagram profile. I also have a dating optimization bio toolkit, which is great. You can grab that if you're interested in kind of learning how I work with people. And I also have a free masterclass called How to Stop Dating Emotionally Unavailable Men and Attract the Right One, because that's what we're going for.
Love it. We'll make sure that we link all of those links up in the show notes.
Perfect. Thank
Thanks,
you so much.
girl. Bye.
Thank you.